Okay, welcome, Mike. Good to have you here. Now, I wonder if you could cast your mind back to the start of 2024 and talk a little bit about what you were expecting from the year ahead.
Yeah, I would tell you this, it never plays out the way you think it's going to play out. And I've been doing this a long time, and every year you start with a certain idea around technology investing, and inevitably, things occur, which is great. It keeps the job fresh. I think in general, we thought that the semiconductor space was going to be a real strong space, and it was for a while, and then it wasn't. So that was required some work. I would have thought by now that some of the software companies, which are businesses we really fundamentally like, would have been executing better with respect to their receptiveness from investors. That really hasn't been the case thus far. Obviously, you've had just, the Magnificent Seven as a group have remained, really strong contributors, to markets. Every year's, a different puzzle to solve for. And I think that's, honestly, it's why the job is great. It's why, it really keeps us on our toes. And sometimes it keeps us up at night. But, there's really no predictability, to be honest with you, in this business.
And what about in terms of the kind of characteristics of the year so far? So have there been any sectors that have been notable winners? Have we still had the kind of obsession with AI? And any areas that have sort of fallen flat, I guess?
Yeah, that's a pretty big question, but there are definitely areas that have been better than others. If you think about, the AI-related companies have really done well, driven obviously by, some of the mega caps there. I think that for the most part, the semiconductor space has had some, really strong performance from some companies, yet pretty mixed from others. So it'd be hard to characterize that space overall as, much better than expected. And then, as I move down into thinking in terms of software, which really, relative to other sectors, has not really performed that well. Within that, cybersecurity, which is a theme that we've been, investors in for a long time. Those names, for the most part, have been okay, not phenomenal. We were fortunate in that there are a couple of them that that we are invested in that have performed well year to date. Internet sector has been a good sector. Have you seen continued interesting opportunities there? But it's pretty mixed overall for the markets.
And I guess we have to talk about the Magnificent Seven. Obviously, they started the year pretty concentrated, and it seemed to have got even more concentrated. So 7 dwindled to 6, and then 5, and then 4. What's your take on it now? It does seem to be that there is some fatigue in the market.
Well, I think you've seen some change in leadership within that group. As they're not all created equal, right? They're very different businesses. The characteristic that they all have, in common is market cap, right? So it doesn't surprise me to see some dispersion there. I actually think it's probably a good thing for markets overall. It's hard to say from here, who the winners is. If it's a singular company, as businesses, they're really good businesses, right? You can go across each one, and as someone who just spends a lot of time analyzing businesses, they're very strong franchises. With like every business, they have opportunities and challenges. So I would expect here for technology to work as a whole, we need to see a broadening out, and hopefully we're starting to see that.
What about the valuation differential between the Magnificent Seven and the rest of the market? Is there any signs that investors are sort of starting to appreciate that there may be value elsewhere?
Yeah, for sure. I think that for most of, those are scale businesses, very mature business mature business models generate lots of, cash flow and earnings as a whole. I think people are looking at other sectors and saying, wow, relative to those names, that other sectors are cheaper. They may not, and just to be clear here, they might not have the same financial metrics because a lot of those businesses are subscale. And obviously when you're a subscale business, you tend not to have peak operating margins by definition. But I definitely think that investors are looking and saying, wow, is this sector too cheap? And is there an opportunity there? But here again, they've been very strong as a group, and it's really I saw an interesting slide showing their contribution to the index, and it's just kind of mind-boggling when you look at it.
So AI has obviously been on people's minds. It's been the dominant theme this year. Are you able to play that theme beyond the Magnificent Seven?
Absolutely, and it's something that I really work with the team on, and encourage everyone to look in terms of when you have a secular theme, what are the first and second derivatives of that particular theme? Because a lot of times those are the companies that actually benefit more at times, and you may be taking less risk because they may be cheaper names from a valuation perspective. So we are seeing opportunities to basically reflect artificial intelligence in the way we've kind of thought about it. It's kind of a two-legged stool, which probably isn't that structurally sound, but I'll go with this analogy. I think that what we've thought about is what are companies that can apply artificial intelligence to their business, and that there's an opportunity set there, and really looking at things like have these businesses grown organically? So do they have the same do the same data model across all, because they haven't done lots of acquisitions, and can you apply artificial intelligence, and more importantly, what does that mean to the customer, right? Because ultimately, if it doesn't mean anything to the customer for these businesses that are spending on it, it's probably not a great investment. So we're thinking in terms of application of artificial intelligence to certain businesses. And then on the other side, there isn't a vertical industry that isn't looking at artificial intelligence and what it might mean to their business. So there's a lot of trials, lots of research being done. And on that side of the equation, we're really looking at the picks and shovels, making sure that, we own the businesses that provide, the tool set for, if it's Exxon Oil or Shell or whomever, to basically, start to trial and start to learn or start to look at artificial intelligence and what aspects of their business can be impacted by it.
Okay. And I mean, obviously, artificial intelligence has absorbed a lot of the oxygen of the technology sector, but presumably there are lots of other themes that you're playing. I wonder if you can talk about some of those.
Yeah, I mean, we as a fund really don't want to have single thematic investment across the trust. Our goal is to have diversity, and that diversity manifests itself at a theme level, at a subsector level, and at a style level. So there are three different kind of equations there, and we think that's really important. And I won't go into too much detail, with respect to the subsector, but I will tell you, thematically, while artificial intelligence is, really exciting, and in my opinion, it is secular, there are also some really great things happening in technology, and whether that's, the continued proliferation of cybersecurity because of the world we live in, whether it's continued spread of semiconductors into, things that you never thought would have semiconductors. And it's that, lastly, something that's still really relevant is movement to the cloud, because if you look at the number of workloads still in data centers, so those workloads need to be moved to the cloud, and that's still an opportunity. And lastly, and I don't know if this is a theme or more of just a function of the world we live in, is this kind of notion of how do businesses meet their customer, right? Businesses need to meet their customers digitally, right? Because you and I probably woke up this morning with a phone, not an alarm clock, telling you when to wake up, and you probably might, go to bed this evening, checking your work email, et cetera, et cetera. So we're living in a really digital world, and it's not just consumers, right? It's business to business. If I think about, I read an interesting article that how, John Deere, which makes agricultural equipment amongst other things, the way that they're selling, tractors and combines, and it's no longer by having the farmer go to the dealership. They're configuring the equipment as they're driving around the field using technology to figure out, how to plant, how to do, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it's just representative of, anything you can do to take friction out of commerce is a good thing for businesses. So we're looking at companies that help that, and they're out there, and it's exciting. It's exciting.
Any companies that have stood out for you this year?
Yeah, a couple come to mind, and our goal is obviously to buy companies that we think are great businesses on a multi-year basis. But kind of backwards looking, if I think about a company like CyberArk, which thus far has done a great job of executing. They are a cybersecurity business that manages something called privileged access. So think about it, somebody asking permission to potentially go, something that's really valuable to you. So maybe a car. So you'd want to know who's driving your car. They have a suite of products that have really become relevant over the past couple of years. And they're executing well. New CEO, knew the previous CEO, really liked him a lot. And now the current CEO is doing a nice job with the business. That comes to mind in the cybersecurity space. If I think about the semiconductor space, I really think about Monolithic Power, which has done a great job of executing thus far. They make power management semiconductors, and as you can imagine, the application of power management is just so incredibly important, right? Whether it's the data center, whether it's in an automobile, whether it's in an industrial application, they seem to be doing an excellent job with respect to kind of taking share in both up and down cycles. So those are two that kind of come to mind.
Yeah. Great. Now, this feels like a cruel question, and I'm definitely not going to ask you who's going to be the winner. But obviously,
by the way, if I knew, I probably wouldn't be sitting here.
But obviously, you will have. There's an election coming up. Do you see any ramifications for the technology sector, either from, tariffs or antitrust rules or that kind of thing?
Yeah, it is definitely top of mind, and it's probably the closest election that I've had that I'll observe in my lifetime. I think in a perfect world, whomever wins, the other party, takes control of the House and Senate. So you have a real check and balance there. On the one hand, Kamala Harris is a California senator and understands the power of technology and has really benefited in a state that leads in that sector, right? It's why we think being in San Francisco affords us a competitive advantage, right? Or being in the Bay Area affords us a competitive advantage. It's one of the things we talk about as a fund. Conversely, Donald Trump is going to be, more hands-off on businesses. You can imagine a scenario whereby, acquisitions being done by companies become easier compared to the current regime. Sadly for all the voters, it really boils down to probably a couple 100,000 votes in swing states, which, as a voter and as someone who cares so much about our country, I think that's unfortunate, but they didn't hire me to relook at the Electoral College or popular voting, but it's definitely top of mind, and and the goal from a trust perspective is to have a trust that is fairly agnostic to whomever might win.
Okay, and then just finally, and with the caveat that we made earlier about it never quite goes the way you expect. anything you're sort of looking forward to in 2025? Anything you're thinking about?
I mean, I've been surprised at some of the sectors that I feel like are really valuable, that really haven't really resulted in the appreciation that we might see. But that's always the case. Look, our job is to find great businesses. So bottoms up investing with the macro overview. And that's something that, we're going to do in good and bad tapes. Go out and look for those companies. Nothing really comes to mind, from a sector perspective that, I think about things like, factory automation. It hasn't been a great sector from an investment perspective thus far. Just trying to, one of the things that we work on as a team is just getting fresh ideas. So, I really encourage, and I do with myself as well, observe, read, see what sparks your intellectual curiosity. Because a lot of times those are the companies, or those are the sectors that end up mattering going forward.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mike.
Great to see you.